Okay, so today we are going to continue our study of chemistry, and we're now going to take a closer look at periodic table of elements, or we just call it the periodic table. So what you see here is the periodic table for the Virginia Standards of Learning. So if you take the Virginia Standards of Learning, this is the periodic table that you'll see, and it's a fairly common representation of it. So one of the first things that we want to look at with the periodic table is how exactly it's laid out. We see that we've got different columns and rows of different elements, but one of the things we want to introduce are the different terms that we use. So instead of saying that we have rows, the term we use is a period. And instead of columns, the term we use is group. So period runs left to right, just like a row, and a group runs up and down, like a column. So for example, say we wanted to find carbon, and like to reference carbon on the periodic table. So carbon is right here. And so we would say, so if we look here, we read over to the left, we see it's in period number 2, and reading up and down, we see it's in group 14. So carbon, period 2, group 14. And so just like that, we can then reference where an element falls in the periodic table. So what are some other things that pieces of information that the periodic table can tell us? So one that's of note and is important to us is this darkened line right here. And this darkened line forms a staircase. If we follow the staircase down, we see this split here, indicating metals are to the left and non-metals are to the right. So that means that everything over here to the left of this staircase, everything over there is a metal. And if we look at some of these elements, that makes sense. For example, over here, iron, well, that makes sense, that's definitely a metal. Cobalt, nickel, copper, these are all metals, and that makes sense. We look to the right, we see oxygen, chlorine, neon, helium, and that makes sense. Those aren't metals. The one exception to this, the one misfit, is hydrogen. Hydrogen in the top left corner up here. But hydrogen really belongs on this side because it's not a metal, it's a gas. And so that is kind of one thing that we can just look at a periodic table really quick and see which side of the staircase something is on. And that lets us know if it's a metal or a non-metal. So the next thing that we notice is this indication right here about transition elements. And basically it's telling us that everything down here are the transition elements, all of these below it. Now what exactly the transition elements are, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but right now it's just important to identify that all of these down here are the transition elements. Now I kind of left the bottom open because we also have this puzzle piece here for the lanthanoid and actinoid series that seems to be jammed into here. And what this tells us is that all of these elements are actually crammed into here. And so if we were to look at our periodic table, and so these guys as well do fall under the transition elements. And what this little notch here tells us is that if we were to, and so I'll do a quick representation here. What the periodic table really looks like, roughly, is this here. So we have our group 1, group 2, but then we have basically the lanthanoid and actinoid series are here, roughly. This is just kind of a rough diagram. And then the transition elements are here, and then we've got, and then here we're back to groups 13 through 18. And so, really, this is what the periodic table would look like. But what we do is, so just to make it, basically, it's to make it fit on a sheet of paper easier, is that we take this piece down here, the lanthanoid series and the actinoid series, and we pull it out so that the shape of the periodic table that we get is the one we're a lot more familiar with. It looks like this, and then we have this little cutaway that shows those two series right there. So that's kind of a third thing just to indicate that when we're looking at the periodic table, that's what all of this information is.